Many people believe the task force began in 2006, and in truth, that's when it began to really motivate and educate our American Jewish leadership. But actually, the beginning of it was in 2000 because of the killing of those 13 Israeli Arabs, actually 12 plus one more. And the Harev Commission that pointed out that there was a great disparity in the Israeli society and the lack of equality of the Israeli Arab. And since we have professionalized in 2006, we've had outstanding professionals. And our latest is, again, one of those great professionals, Liron Shochan, who has done a magnificent job in this very difficult time. We constitute 74 paying organizations. There are many more that are involved that listen to our different reports. And I urge you to look at our annual report that has just come out. It gives you the full breadth and depth of the task force and its educational program. In any case, we have a very full agenda today, a big program. And so, Liron, I want you to take it over and please start with our first introduction.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for joining us today to this annual meeting. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Please make sure you stay muted, go on to speaker view, and I encourage everyone to use the chat freely over this meeting. We have staff Erica and Ilan who will be responding or gathering your chats so that they're not just out there in the ether. A quick thank you to the staff who have made this whole day come together, fingers crossed. For those of you that don't know the task force or are new to the task force, we are an American Jewish organization educating about Arab citizens of Israel for the American Jewish community. I will jump straight to today. If you were here for last year's annual meeting, we thought that was a complex year to review because of Israel's series of elections and the unprecedented role that Arab political leadership were pushing to have at the national table. This year, 2020, not only did elections continue in Israel, but they were topped with something that we may know as you may be familiar with the coronavirus pandemic. With so many moving pieces at play, we invited a keynote to give us a year in review, to look at what the major issues were and how do we look at all these complex issues from the perspective of Arab society. That has our keynote has dedicated his career to bringing Israel's Arab society into Hebrew mainstream media. Eran Zinger is the commentator for Arab society for the Israeli Broadcasting Authority. He is a host of a weekly radio show, Marhabet, a television show, Kol Israel, and a third television show in the making about Arab citizens of Israel that is coming for next year. He'll share his insights for about 25 minutes, and then there'll be time for Q&A. Again, I encourage you to use the chat freely during the presentation. Before Eran comes on, I will ask Erica to share a short clip from a recent show. Erica, are you able to share? There we go.
السلام عليكم. قاعدين نسمع بالآونة الأخيرة على اتفاقية السلام اللي صارت بين إسرائيل ودولة الإمارات، وقاعدين نسمع كثير ردود فعل ما بين مؤيدين ومعارضين، وكيف الإماراتيين راح يتجولوا من شوارع بلادنا. خلينا نسمع شو رأي الشارع بالموضوع. طال عمرك.
זה קרה לא מזמן בחיפה. בחור צעיר, בביגוד מסורתי, ערבית בלהט בדואי, בתוך ג'יפ יקר, בקיצור, מחופש לעשיר מהמפרץ, שוטט בעיר התחתית, ושמע מה יש לרחוב לומר על ההסכם בין ישראל לאיחוד האמירויות.
السلام عليكم يا مرحبا بكم. حابين نسألك شو رأيك بالسلام اللي صار بين إسرائيل ودولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة؟
عيب وعار وضد.
رأيي فخار يكسر بعضه. زين، يعني أنت لا مع ولا ضد؟ התגובות היו מהממות, בין נגד ובין בעד. كلهم بيستكلوا علي، كلهم تخيلوا للسلام، عربي أنا شو مخجبوش أني بقمات الإمارات. هل راح تزور الإمارات؟ وأي دولة تحديدا؟ شو تحديدا؟
طبعا كلها مشهورة، تعرف عليها.
الصراحة لا، إشي حلو والله، حلو مميز، بس من ناحية سياسي מש عن جد.
בעוד הציבור היהודי בארץ תומך כמעט כולו בנרמול הקשרים עם איחוד האמירויות, בציבור הערבי הדעות חלוקות והוויכוח לא נגמר.
Iran, please, over to you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of you, and thank you very much for having me here. Shalom from Haifa. What you've just seen is a very short clip of a weekly television show, which it's the main let's say objective of my television and radio shows for my Hebrew-speaking listeners and viewers is to explain to them what's going on within the Arab-speaking community in Israel, or the Arab-speaking communities in Israel. Because when we talk about Arabs, you know, I mean, you have Muslim and you have Christians and you have Druze, and I found out that, and my bosses also found out, my editors also found out that we Jews know nothing about our neighbors. And when we talk about our neighbors, it's not about our neighbors in the Gulf. It's not about our neighbors in Syria across the border or in Lebanon. We know nothing about our neighbors here in Haifa. I every time I go out to the street and I take some pictures for a television show or for my radio program, I'm amazed to know how much I don't know about my neighbors. And what you've just seen is a short clip in which I tried to explain to my Jewish audience what's going on inside the Israeli citizens or the Arab Israeli citizens. We are going through a very challenging time here in Israel right now, because on the one hand, almost every day we hear good news coming from the Gulf and from the Gulf countries, from Bahrain and from the UAE, and it seems that the government is doing everything it can in order to make Israelis understand that this is what we need to have, a peaceful solution with our neighbors. But it stops there. It doesn't go inside. And unfortunately, you will find Israelis who will not treat the same way, or will not say the same things they say about Arabs living outside of Israel and Arabs living inside Israel. And this is the most important part of my job, is to show them that things are not black and white. You have so many colors between these colors, and you have so many things to explain to them that they don't usually understand. I have so many things to tell you, but if I had to choose the main issues that I'm dealing with lately, is to explain to my audience that what's going on with the Arabs in Israel is in a way something that happened to Jews in Israel in 70 years, in more than 7 decades, because everything that happened to us Jews is happening to the Arabs, but in a much more faster way. If you choose, or if you check what's going on with higher education among Arabs in Israel, if you go to the Israeli universities today, and you see how many women wearing hijab, the traditional Arab clothing, how many Muslim students are in Muslim and Christian students are now in the Israeli Technion. Even more than that, you know, every time I'm asked to perform and to explain to Israeli Jews about what's going on in the Arab community, and when I get to the houses of people and explain to them in all kinds of lectures that I give, the number one question that I will give my Jewish audience is, when was the last time someone here in this audience saw a Jewish pharmacist? a Jew, I mean, pharmacists who are a male or female, who are part of the Jewish people? And the answer is hardly no. Thing is that more and more Arabs are now part of the Israeli society much more than they used to be in the past. As I said, you can see it in the universities, you can see it in job places, in the Israeli high tech. And if I had to summarize everything and just to give you one main headline is, I would say that even though Arabs in Israel don't have a political power, they're not counted. They don't count. The Israeli parties don't count them. The Israeli Jewish parties don't count them. Even though they don't have a political power, they have a civil power, much stronger civil power today than they used to have in the past. And this will bring me to the news that we're now sharing right now in Israel, or that we're now seeing right now in Israel. For the first time ever, this is not a game of Jews and Jews. Netanyahu is now doing everything he can in order to avoid new elections. This is what he says. You have Netanyahu on the right side, you have Gantz on the left side, and for the first time in the history, in the political history of Israel, I believe, you would find something not normal going on in what we call the most significant political power of the Arabs in Israel, which is the joint list. You have Ram, the party of Ram, the Islamic movement in Israel, saying to Netanyahu, we are ready to work with you. In the past, if there were any connections, if there were any talks between Netanyahu and the Muslim of the Islamic movement, I mean, Ram party, it was always very secret. No one would be able to talk about it. And now for the first time, Mansour Abbas, member of Knesset Mansour Abbas, is saying to Netanyahu out loud in public, I am ready to support you, Mr. Netanyahu, and to give you whatever you need politically and also when it comes to your judicial problems, but you will have to give me something for it. And this is the main game, or this is the new game that we're now playing in Israel. Because what Mansour Abbas is saying to his own people is, maybe we should not be part of the Israeli left anymore. We are not, as we say in Hebrew, we're not in the pocket of the Israeli left. There's no reason why we cannot talk to the Israeli right. Now, he's not only saying that, he's doing things. Last week, for the first time ever, you could see an Arab member of Knesset performing on Israeli Channel 20. If I would be asked to tell you what is Israel Channel 20, the automatic answer would be Fox News. But ladies and gentlemen, it's much more than Fox News. Channel 20 is Netanyahu. Channel 20 is the Likud. But it's not the traditional Likud, it's the hardcore Likud. And seeing a member of the Knesset, an Arab member of the Knesset, one of the leaders of the Islamic movement in Israel, on television, not a regular television, but on Channel 20 in Israel, this is a significant step that he has taken. And the question that everybody is asking right now, why is he doing so? He says that for the first time in the history of Israel, he will be able to say yes to a government that will say yes to him. And this is where I have to get into the most crucial issues that are now on the table when it comes to the Arab minority in Israel. When you ask an Arab man or an Arab woman, what is the most difficult problem you're now facing? What is the biggest challenge that you have to face right now? They would tell you that their number one problem is violence. When I talk about violence, I'm talking about something like 100 people, 100 Israeli citizens that are murdered every year in the last years. But it's not only the murdering of these people, it's the atmosphere in the Arab cities, in the Arab villages. you would go to an Arab village not far away from here, where I'm sitting right now in Haifa. You would go to the Galilee. This time it's now almost 8 o'clock in the evening, and you would hear shooting in the air. You would be noticing that people are very scared to walk outside their houses. You would listen to stories about women that are slaughtered or are threatened to be slaughtered by their husbands. And what Mansour Abbas is trying to say or to prove right now is, if I cooperate with Netanyahu, maybe I have a chance that the government of Israel, for the first time in more than 70 years, will give us, the Arabs, the budgets that we need so much in order to confront this challenge of violence. His friends, not only from the Joint List, but also from the Islamic movement, are laughing at him. They say, what are you doing? Instead of helping us to get rid of Netanyahu, you are supporting Netanyahu, and you are supporting Netanyahu's chances to survive. But you know, this is what's so interesting in Israel, especially among the Arabic speaking or the Arab community inside Israel. First time when I heard Mansour Abbas saying that he's willing to help Netanyahu, I was sure that this was his end. I was sure that this was the end of his career. But you know, it's not enough to talk to politicians. It's not enough to see what politicians have to say. I mean, his rivals. You have to go out to the street and ask people. And I was amazed to see how many Arabs are in favor of what Mansour Abbas is now practicing, or is now trying to practice. How many Arabs are saying, we are Muslims, we are not denying our Palestinian identity, but there's no reason why we should be part of the Israeli left. What did the left, or what the Israeli left do for us in the last 70 years? Nothing. Even more than that, if you ask some politicians, they would tell you that it was the Israeli left that built the settlements. It was the Israeli left that was responsible for the military regime in the 50s. And you have more and more other excuses for Arabs to say we're not working with the Israeli left. So the question that every Israeli is asking himself right now as we talk is, what's going to happen tomorrow morning? Tomorrow morning, Israel time, the Israeli Knesset will be voting whether we are going to another cycle of elections. But nobody knows what Mansour Abbas is going to say. And even now, when I talk to you, I don't know the answer. But it's not only violence. It's demolitions of houses. It's the infrastructure inside the Arab villages. It's everything that has to do with the daily life of Arabs in Israel. They feel frustrated on the one hand. On the other hand, and this is another thing that I have, this is another insight from my work in the last few years in Israel. You know, as a Jew, sometimes I say to myself, wow, you have Chok HaLeom, the law of nationality. You have all kinds of restrictions. You have all kinds of stories about how police mistreat the Arabs, and all kinds of stories about racism in the Israeli press. But still, when you ask Arabs, and we have some surveys saying that, the vast majority of Arabs feel that they are part of this country. They want to be part of Israel. And by the way, I have a very nice answer for it. And Liron will have to excuse me. Sometimes I cannot be so PC. You know, if we're not using a PC language, when you ask the Israeli Jews, they would tell you, we don't need the Arabs. We don't like the Arabs. But we like the country. We like the reality here. You'll be amazed to know that the same thing goes with the Arabs. Or maybe you won't be amazed to know. When you ask Arabs, I never heard an Arab saying, I hate the Jews, but they dislike the Jews. When I say they, I'm generalizing, of course. But it's not a love story between the people, between the peoples between the Arabs and the Jews. It is a love story between the Arabs in Israel and the state of Israel. And I'm not exaggerating here. When you check, when you go and ask Arabs what they feel about the state of Israel, you will find that there is no other place they want to go to. This is it's not only their house, it's also their home. It's not only their home, it's also their house. And when I'm talking about house, I'm not talking about the historic Palestine in their eyes. I'm talking about the Israeli state, the Israeli institutions, the judicial system in Israel. They trust it. The media in Israel, they trust the Hebrew-speaking media more than they trust the Arabic-speaking media. They don't trust the police, not yet. They trust the Israeli system of health. They trust the Israeli hospitals. Not only do they trust Israeli hospitals, wherever you go in Israel, every hospital you go in Israel, you will find Arab doctors, Arab nurses. You have, not far away from here in Naharia, you have a hospital that is run by an Arab doctor who is the manager of this hospital, the public hospital of Naharia. And what I'm trying to say is, I'm going back to what I said earlier, that even though Arabs don't have a political power, or they don't feel they have a political power, they feel they have a civil power in their hands. And I believe that this is what Mansour Abbas is trying to say to the Israelis, both Arabs and Jews, that we can use and we should use our civil power to make sure that we are part of this country. Now, of course, there are many questions regarding the true objective of Mansour Abbas. Is it Netanyahu that he wants to go with? Is it Ayman Odeh that he wants to challenge and to get rid of? We don't know. I mean, I know he doesn't like Ayman Odeh because of the LGBT thing and a few months ago, Ayman Odeh and his friends from Hadash were voting for for the law that says no to what's the definition in English, Liron?
There was a law to ban to not allow conversion therapy.
Exactly, and Ayman Odeh was saying or was supportive. I mean, he supported this law, and he said what all of the tipulei amara, as we call it in Hebrew, the conversion treatments of gay people in Israel is something that we have to be against. This is what Ayman Odeh said, and once he said that, he started a real war inside the joint list, because people like Mansour Abbas and the Islamic movement, they said, we cannot be supportive of LGBT rights. No way. And this is what's so special about Arabs in Israel. On the one hand, they say they cannot support LGBT rights. On the other hand, they are able to support a prime minister who called the Arabs with so many names in the past, or the prime minister who was responsible for Chok HaLe'om, for the law of nationality. I would like to go further and tell you that when you talk to Arabs in Israel, as I said earlier, not only that they feel part of this country, they are not always so free to talk about their Palestinian identity. And this is where I go to what's going on in the Gulf right now. You know, all Israelis are talking about the fact that very soon we'll be able to fly to Dubai and other places in the Gulf. What about the Arabs? What's going on with the Arabs? And you know, what you've just seen in my report was a question that is now being asked. On the one hand, the political voices within the government or within the Knesset, the Arab members of Knesset are saying, we cannot be part, or we cannot support any kind of agreements that eventually will make the Palestinian issue disappear. Because once you sign a treaty, once you normalize the relations between Israel and the Arab states, what's going to happen with Palestine? So this is what the politicians are saying. But when you ask the average Arab in Israel, when you go to the street and ask them, what do you say about it? They would tell you, give me a chance and I'll be on the first plane. I want to go there. I want to be part of it. And I think that what you see here in Israel is a real struggle between two major powers. The power of Arabs, or Palestinian Arabs in Israel, or Palestinian Israelis, or Israelis of Palestinian descent, who are saying, no way, we cannot support Netanyahu, we cannot support the peace accords with the Gulf states, because everybody is working to get rid of Palestine, and we are Palestine. But at the same time, you will find a growing number of Palestinians in Israel who are not ashamed of their Palestinian identity, but they would tell you, with all due respect, Palestine can wait. Palestine would have to wait because we have to think about them ourselves. If we want to think about ourselves, we should be part of, no, we should not be part of the left, of the Israeli left. Maybe we should help the Israeli right. Maybe if we want to convince the government to help us confront all the challenges we have, maybe we will also be supportive of a government that will not put Palestine on the head of its agenda. This is what I had to emphasize here. I have 5 minutes left or something like that. Liron, it's okay? Yeah? Where are we going, or where are we heading to? And this is something that Liron and I were discussing, whether I should open my talking with you, or I should save it to the end of my conversation with you. Eventually, with all due respect to the efforts made by so many organizations to make Arabs feel that they're part of Israel, and so many organizations here in Israel that are doing so many beautiful things to make us Israelis, Arabs and Jews, feel that we're all part of this country, I have to say that the reality speaks differently. Even though we are not considered, or Israel is not considered to be a binational state according to the international law, because we're not, I would tell you that the reality in Israel is binational. I would almost tell you that Israel is a binational state. And if I had to prove it, I would just give you a few examples. Here in Israel, in the last few weeks, in the last few months, on a weekly basis, you would see thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of Israelis go to Jerusalem to demonstrate against the government of Netanyahu. The number of Arabs you will find there is almost zero. Zero. Why? Even if you don't want to be part of this game, aren't you part of the Israeli reality? You will not find Arabs. I'm talking about only a very small numbers of them. On the one hand, on the other hand, because of the growing violence, you could see some demonstrations in Arab villages and Arab cities against demonstrations against violence against women. You would see mostly women, Arab women, holding signs and saying, we're fed up with violence, we're fed up with women being slaughtered by their husbands. How many Jews you would see there? How many Jewish women would you see there? Zero. Zero. And if you want me to give you another example to why I think Israel, even if it's not a binational state, it's living its binational reality, you go back to what we call in Hebrew, Chok HaLeom, the law of nationality in Israel is, to what I feel today, is a law that was made by the government of Israel in order to stop, or in order to try and stop the reality, the binational reality, in order to make Arabs not move to Jewish cities, in order to make Arabs stay in their villages. Netanyahu and his government spent billions of shekels in the last few years inside the Arab communities or inside the Arab society. It was not for the love of Arabs. It was for the love of another reality, if I could say that, to make sure that Arabs can build houses in their villages and cities. They have good infrastructure. They can live their lives there with good schools and good education system, but not go out of their cities, not to mix up with Jews in Carmiel, in the Galilee, in Nahariya, in Akko, in Haifa, and other places. And when you tell the Israelis, when you use the term binationalism or binational state, most of Israelis would tell you, oh my God, no, we don't want that. And I'm a journalist. It's not my position to say whether it's good or bad. The thing is, I think it's very bad that Israelis, Jews and Arabs, are not aware of it. They are not aware of the new reality that we're now seeing, because it's very easy to talk about politics and to talk about Mansour Abbas, whether he's part of the left or part of the right. No, ladies and gentlemen, the question that all Israelis are now facing or have to face, and they don't face it because it's not part of the Israeli agenda right now in the media. But the question that has to be asked is, what's going to be here, not in 50 years, in 10 years' time? What's going to happen with the society or the societies, the Jewish society and the Arab society? How long can we keep on telling ourselves that this is not the correct way to live our lives here? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to take the first question, and then I'm going to aggregate some of the questions from the room. I think we are in a really, really different reality than, to say the least, than we were last year. And I want to ask, the insights you shared about the support for or lack of criticism of Mansour Abbas in pulling Arab politics now to the right. Do you see this inherently as support, really just an interest in pragmatism, or is there a source of this attitude in the street that is drawn from frustration, from a sense of lack of faith, lack of sense that it's possible that after Gantz rejected the joint list recommendation to build a center-left government?
I think it goes back to the identity of the Arabs in Israel, Liron. Because if you ask, when you ask an Arab in Israel, an Arab man or an Arab woman in Israel, what is your identity? I would tell you, most of them would tell you, I'm an Israeli. I'm an Israeli. Some of them would tell you, I'm a Palestinian Israeli, or I'm an Arab Israeli, or an Israeli, or an Arab living in Israel. But it's all a part of their identity. And I really think that that Mansour Abbas, even though you can criticize him for the way he does what he does right now, but you cannot ignore the support he gets from the street, because you know what? Even though so many Arabs in Israel don't feel that they have so many things in common with the Jews, when you compare Palestinians in Israel to their brothers and sisters in the Palestinian Authority, in Jenin, in Ramallah, in Bethlehem, when you ask them, who do you feel closer to You know what the answer would be? It would be either I feel closer to the Israelis, or I don't feel closer, not to you and not to them. And this is why they have their unique identity that gives them the possibility to play the game differently. And this is what Abbas is now doing in the Knesset.
So it's a different path. This path is happening at the same time that there have been quite a few moves in recent months to refresh and revitalize the idea of a Jewish-Arab political partnership from Jewish progressive leadership as well as Arab progressive leadership. How do you square this these two moves, both to keep pushing for a Jewish-Arab progressive party and coalition, and what you've been speaking about? And then we have questions on the chat. Please keep adding questions. We'll get to your questions.
How do you say in English? Been there, done that. We tried it already. We tried a joint list of Jews and Arabs. We tried some kind of partnership between Jews and Arabs. It didn't work. And you don't have to go so far. Look what happened with Meretz. Meretz was the ultimate party to show some kind of partnership between Jews and Arabs. And look what happened to one of its most significant partners of Meretz, Isawi Frej. He was kicked out of the party. He was not in the first 5 or the first 7, which means that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. By the way, I truly believe that the fact that the idea of a joint list of Jews and Arabs is not working is another proof to what I told you earlier about the fact that even though it's not a binational state, this is a binational reality. And you cannot make such a list successful in a binational reality.
We have, we have 3 good questions in the chat, but we're also running out of time. So I'm going to read all 3 of them to you, and then please give us as best answer as you can. So from Sarah Silver, hi Sarah, is Abbas' step towards Likud a reflection, chat is moving as I'm speaking, a reflection of changing geopolitics in the region? Is he being encouraged by forces outside Israel?
Yes, the answer is yes. He is being, yes. Yes, I wish I knew which forces, but he is not independent. When he decides to go with Netanyahu, someone is saying it from the outside, and I'm not sure who it is. When we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamic Party in Israel, the Islamic movement, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic movement is a genuine part of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, in Qatar, in Gaza, and of course in Turkey. And when Mansour Abbas does what he does, I'm sure that he has support from the outside. Yes.
Okay, I'm moving quickly. Next, from Libby Linkinski. I've recently met with some folks in Lod and Jaffa, people in their 30s or so, who come out of the Balad camp and are now taking up jobs and positions in municipalities. How does that trend fit together with your analysis of binationalism that you described? Oh,
there's no contradiction. People are much more educated today. Arabs are more highly educated. They thanks to many laws of this government and former governments, you would see more and more Arabs in high-ranked positions in the Israeli institutions. The fact that you will find Arabs inside the Israeli workforce does not mean that they don't support the idea of a Palestinian state or of a Palestinian entity, or inside Israel, I mean, or a binational reality, as I said.
Last question, and then if you can comment on recent judicial ruling on the case in Carmiel, which the judge based on the nation state law on funding of transportation for Arab children.
Yes, it happened a few days ago. It was when a judge ruled out what he ruled out, or a judge decided what he decided according to the law of nationality. He said, or he used the law of nationality as a basis for his ruling. And what he did was another proof of the fact of what I tried to say earlier. Even if you ladies and gentlemen, if you don't support my insight or my theory or what I have to say about the binational reality, the fact is that many Arabs in the Galilee are looking for places to raise their children in a safe environment with good schools, with good housing. And when you have violence in the Arab villages right next to Carmiel, when you have people slaughtered there, when you have very bad schools, parents are doing whatever parents have to do in Israel, in Europe, in the States, to find a safer place for their children. And this is why they go to Carmiel. But when you go back to the history of Israel, Carmiel was a part of the Israeli project of making the Galilee Jewish, what we call Yehuda Galil. And when you have something like, I don't have the exact numbers because the government is not giving us the exact numbers, but it's almost a third of the people in Carmiel today are Arabs. Wow. How can it be? How can it be that Carmiel is now turning to be a place where it's not only Jewish? This is what I'm trying to say here. And this is what the law of nationality, Chok HaLeom, is also trying to say.
Eran, I want to thank you. The task force is a coalition of American Jewish organizations from throughout the North America, from all sorts of backgrounds. And I think you challenged every one of us. And I think that is really, I very much appreciate that. I think you gave us a lot of food for thought, and I anticipate that many of the issues that you put on the table today will be ones that we will continue discussing this year and next. A real pleasure having you. I know you have a very busy day coming up. So from me and on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much. And Liron, you know that I'm always open. If you want me in the future, I'm always here. Thank you very much.
I want you to translate your shows into English. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay, so now for a little segue to see a little bit who's in the room and in a sense, take a breath after that very intense and then content-rich keynote. We have a small poll to see who's here. Michelle, if you can please put the link into the chat. If you can all click on that link, there are 4 questions. They're very easy, and it's just a chance to see who's here. Michelle, can you please share the screen so we can see the results as they come in? So how many tasks, wait, that's the last question. So you will be asked how many task force annual meetings you've been to, what type of organizations you're from, if you've been to an Arab community in Israel, and go. Let's see if results are coming in. Does everybody see the link in the chat? The link isn't working. It says code needed. Oh no. Michelle, can you reset the, thank you. At least we know the chat is working. This is Michelle fast at work.
Sorry.
So I'll take a moment to just say that this task force would not be possible without a really great team. We're small but dedicated, very professional staff. Michelle Herrera here at the controls. Erica Schaps, our new program manager. Ilan Fathi Amit, the new Israel representative. Okay, there we go. And thank you to everyone.
Sorry, everyone, it closed out of my.
Of course, we practiced this about 10 times. Can you repost the link too?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, it's working now if you enter the code. Thank you everyone for your patience. Okay, I have been to an Arab community in Israel. Yes, this is nice. We have about 110 people here. And about half of it responded so far. Michelle, you want to move on to the next question?
Of course.
So the task force serves a whole variety of American Jewish organizations. And the idea is that we're small and agile and can really work with each organization according to the character of the community and their own missions. And I really love this response. It shows the diversity of organizations we work with and professionals that are in the room. So we really have about a quarter foundation, a quarter other, 20%, 18% from federations, JCRCs, and advocacy organizations. Thank you everyone for responding. Next question, please. Wow. So this question, has your community hosted programs about or has activities related to Arab society in Israel? This is an overwhelming yes. Granted, this audience is a selected audience, self-selecting audience, but as Brian said, this formal body started in 2006 out of a recognition that these issues were not getting onto the agendas or the part of the discourse of American Jewish communities. So this is a really great response. Please, next. Wonderful. So thank you. It's really nice to see so many new faces in the room, and it's really wonderful to have so many representatives of members that have been with us for many, many years. Brian, did you want to say something? No. Okay. All right. Let us move on to the panel. Thank you, Michelle. So what we have after this insight, which gave us an overview of the main issues in the current discourse right now, which didn't even talk about the coronavirus. We invited panelists who can speak with us about the two dominant issues: coronavirus in Arab society and the political discourse, which saw the unprecedented developments. We have with us today Dr. Nihaya Daoud, a professor of public health at Ben-Gurion University. Among the many committees on which she serves or has served, she has chaired the National Council on Public Health and co-founded the Follow-Up Committee for Health in Palestinians in Israel. Ayman Saif, Director of Arab Society at Israel's National Corona Headquarters, Magen Israel. Many of our audiences may be familiar with Ayman for his groundbreaking work as the founding director of the Authority for Economic Development for the Arab sector, originally in the Prime Minister's office. And Afif Abu Mouh, in the hot seat today, joins us as a political commentator and columnist, a contributor to Al Monitor and numerous Israeli papers. Afif promotes public discussion in Arab society and Arab voices in the Israeli media. And by day, he's a computer engineer. So I would like to ask, I want to start with Professor Daoud. We begin with Corona. I just want to see, Professor Daoud, can you unmute yourself and say something so we can see you?
Yes. You
Thank
hear
you.
me?
Yes. Wonderful, thank you. So you are an epidemiologist and a professor in public health at Ben-Gurion University, and you research root causes of health inequities. And over this year, you looked at access to health services and trust in government directives through the lens of the coronavirus. Corona in Arab society started as a success story, and now the numbers are some of the highest in Israel. Over this time, you've been looking at it as a public health issue. Can you take us a little bit into what happened? Why did the story change? And in what ways is the experience in Arab society different from that of Jewish communities?
Thank you, Liron. Thank you for inviting me and for everyone for coming to this panel. I'm going to share a short presentation with you to answer your question about the coronavirus in the Arab community in Israel. So as you mentioned, Limor, the coronavirus started really with the wave 1, with the small number of cases among the Palestinians in Israel, and showed really a different trends of the spread of the virus in the Palestinian community compared to the Jewish or the general population. So here you see that it was in wave 1, which was around February to May, it was around 5% of the positive cases, and it increased to something around 30% of the cases in June and September, and it was reduced very nicely in October. But again, at the middle of October, it started raising, and now we see that it is about half of the positive cases in Israel. It is about 15% of the total cases starting from February, when February 1st, the 21st was the first case of the coronavirus in Israel. What we see and worrying us more is that the severe cases, more severe cases are being discovered in the Palestinian Arab community in Israel. It's around 30%. Mostly are men at the age of 40 to 60 who are at increased risk for this severe morbidity. Mortality is around 13%, and many of the Arab communities now and villages and towns are red according to the traffic light plan of Gamzo. And we see that the reproduction rate is around 1 to sometimes around even 2 in some localities. A study that was conducted between February to August showed that the average number of cases in the Palestinian Arab towns and villages around in a statistical area in the Arab localities is around 50 cases, while it was around 37 cases in the general statistical areas in Israel. For the Jewish non-religious Jew is about 23, and for the ultra-Orthodox it was very high. Now the numbers are different because of the changes in the spread of the virus. So to answer your question, Limor, I thought about the emergency management cycle and try to answer it. You know, we academics, we like models. We like, you know, to analyze things according to theories, models. So I pick up this emergency management cycle, and I will talk about preparedness, response, recovery, and prevention in the Arab community regarding the coronavirus crisis. So prevention is about the actions that the government undertake all the times in order to prevent any crisis in the community. And the preparedness is about making arrangements and creating plans, tests, education, and training, and also sharing information. And these actions also are taken all the time in order to prepare for crisis times. response are the short-term actions that are during or immediately or after, immediately after the emergency crisis to protect the community from any damage that can happen around the crisis. And recovery is the support that is provided to the community in terms of infrastructure and other sorts of support in order to prevent any long-term damage. It can last for many years after the crisis happens. So if we look at the Palestinian society coronavirus and the coronavirus outbreak through this lens of these components of this model, we can see that there are huge gaps that happened in wave 1 that led to wave 2 and what we are seeing now, which is now in Israel, we are talking about even wave 3 that is starting just now. So in terms of prevention, we think that the Palestinian Arab society, because it suffers from long-term inequalities in healthcare services and low socioeconomic status and has higher risk for chronic illnesses like diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and cancer compared to the Jewish population. And also it lacks leadership in public health because it is less involved in the decision-making levels at the Ministry of Health. We think that the prevention part here is really lacking because of all of these gaps. The preparedness, in terms of preparedness, we see that in the Arab localities in the first wave, we noticed that there was a lack of emergency services in these localities because of the problematic infrastructure close to the events of 2000 that Iran mentioned before. These services were not developed. No ambulances arrived to especially the MADA ambulances arrived to the Arab villages and towns. So in wave 1, the coronavirus tests were not conducted in a proper way as it was in the Jewish localities. The third thing here, so the second thing regarding the preparedness is about controlling the data and transparency about the data regarding health and healthcare services. We actually, as Palestinians in Israel, we don't have any data server that we have all the data about us. So we have to get this data from the Ministry of Health, and this is not available for us as professionals all the time. Regarding the response to the coronavirus, what we saw immediately during the emergency around February, that the publication of official instructions in Arabic came late. And the Minister of Health published instructions mainly in Hebrew. The media campaigns in Arabic were very little, and it was not culturally appropriate. As I said, there was a lack to tests in wave 1 and less drive-in sites in the Palestinian localities. The epidemiologic investigation.
I wonder if I can interrupt you there, just because there's a lot of content and it's really it's really professional level. I want to kind of bring it down and get examples. Wave 1, even though there were gaps in information in Arabic, it took time for that information to get in. There was mistrust. Still, the infection rates were relatively low in Arab society, but and we heard stories of initial cooperation between MADA, local health providers, Pikuda OF, and Arab communities. So that was something I think a lot of us were saying, wow, there's good, this is an opportunity for national and local cooperation. And somehow the numbers stayed low. What happened in recent months that that saw this what is the level of cooperation now, and what happened in recent months that
this is exactly what I'm trying to answer. Because what happened in wave 1 has implications for the next, okay, for wave 2 and later on. So yes, so there was, you know, the lack of solutions for isolation and other issues regarding the coronavirus. And the Palestinians were not included in the national team regarding the coronavirus. And also for the recovery from wave 1, although the Palestinians did very well during the wave 1, this might answer some of your question, there was no allocation of resources for the recovery in the Palestinian localities after wave 1. So all the resources that could help the Arab localities were not available. And we know that the Arab localities suffer from lower socioeconomic status. The funding was really very short to these localities. Adding to this, actually, the healthcare system in Israel, lack of funding, which increased inequalities, the militarization and politicization of the coronavirus, at least this was felt by the healthcare professionals in Israel, specifically in public health, and the unstable political climate that Iran mentioned before, and the lack of power for Palestinians in Israel, all of this brought into lack of trust in the directives of the Ministry of Health, and a lack of trust in the management of the coronavirus, which is, you know, is something that we can say that it is for the general population, but for the Palestinians, because of this specific context that I talked about now, it was even affected more. The trust was affected more, and we see that this trust was much higher. So what we did, we conducted 2 surveys about trust and the performance of the directives of the Minister of Health in wave 1 and wave 2. As you can see, there were about 600 participants in wave 1 and wave 2, Jewish and Arab, and they answered an online questionnaire that was distributed by social media in Arabic and Hebrew. And here you can see the trust among the Palestinians in different resources. You can see for the Prime Minister in wave 1, it was 33 trust, and it reduced to 18. And the trust was reduced in all the other factors that we actually examined. And this is maybe might answer your question, Liron, about what happened. Palestinians lost trust, but only 2 actually here. The local authority was increased. Trust was increased in local authority, and trust was increased in social media. Okay, which is very interesting.
Just to be clear, when you talk about a lack of trust, you mean the Arab communities, they were hearing directives, they were talking about prevention, but that in the community themselves, people didn't believe this, didn't believe it, didn't follow it. What do you, what is
they thought actually that the corona is a conspiracy. It is coming to help the politicians. It is not about health. This was, you know, something that we found. It's not just about among the Palestinians, also among the Jewish population. You can see the other slide here that we have. We have the same trends for the Jewish also, but you see the differences are here a little different from the Palestinians among the Jewish. So the same trends we see here, that also Jewish lost trust of the directives about the corona, okay, that come from the Prime Minister, from the Ministry of Health, from MADA, and from also the general practitioner and their nurse, and from the NGOs. Only from the social media that it was increased, and also for the local authority. For the projector, you can see that trust was a little higher. So the general trust, the total trust was reduced for Palestinians from wave 1 to wave 2, and almost stays the same for the Jewish, okay? When we count all the types of trust that I showed in the previous slides, we came to this percent of trust in each of these populations. So Palestinians were to those reduced, and for the Jewish. Now, we took this further and we looked at keeping the social distancing, and we found that keeping the social distancing was associated with trust, means that persons who had higher trust, they were more likely to follow the directives of the Ministry of Health. Persons also for the Jewish and for the Arab, okay? So if you have higher trust score, you will be more likely to follow the instructions, as you can see in wave 1 and in wave 2, but this is less now in wave 2. The other thing that we noticed in this study, we looked at the instructions provided in the native language, and we found that the Palestinians reported that they got less instructions in their language, and it was also associated with less keeping the directives. The other very important thing that happened in this crisis is the effect of the crisis on mental health. So
what we had a 3 minute
yes,
time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So for the mental health, we found that Palestinians suffered from high anxiety, also in the first wave and in the second wave, but it increased in the second wave. The same, it increased for the Jewish, but the increase in the Jewish was higher, as you can see, okay? Also, low trust was associated with higher anxiety. So people who lack trust, they had less anxiety. So just to sum up about our conclusions about what happens for the Palestinians in Israel, we think that all the atmosphere that happened also at the local level for the Palestinians, and also the history of the inequalities for Palestinians, inequalities in health and discrimination in healthcare services that last for many years, as you can see here, starting from the military curfew over Palestinians, continued after the military curfew was over, and then after the enactment of the healthcare services, still the Palestinians are not holding any decision-making positions, not involved in decision-making. So I think this is, it's very important to engage Palestinians in decision-making and help to build partnership with them and to build leadership in public health and reduce inequalities in health. As I showed before, the inequalities in health doesn't help actually in building trust in this community. Also, reducing the health gaps are very important. So I think the coronavirus can be an opportunity to reduce the gaps, the long-term gaps, also the short-term gaps that that came around the coronavirus. Currently, this is not happening. The handling of the coronavirus is not professional. The projector of the coronavirus for the Arab population is not a health professional, is not a public health professional. I think this should be changed. At least he should be accompanied with his work with a professional team, public health, because as you heard before, there are more and more Palestinians who are a specialist and a professional in public health. And in Israel, a projector was appointed from the health sector in August 15. And this was a very, very important for building trust. As you saw there in my slides, that the trust in the projector was very high for the Palestinians and for also the Jewish. So I think it's very important to have a projector in public health and leadership in public health for the coronavirus as a start. And also, as I said, work to reduce the health gaps for many years for the Palestinians and the Israelis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this really, really rich presentation. We got several requests for your PowerPoint, so I hope that we'll be able to share it with everyone. If you can email it to me, then I think there's many people interested in being able to look at it.
I will not be able to, because we have to publish the paper about trust, and then I can share it.
Okay, so when you publish the paper about trust, we'll make sure it is available.
When it will be accepted.
Thank you very much, because we are, I do not mean to be rude, but we are so, we have so much content for a short amount of time that I want to move quickly on to Ayman Saif. Ayman, if you can unmute yourself and say hello.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Ayman.
Good evening. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. We know that you are in a very busy position and a busy time. You are the Director for Arab Society at Israel's National Corona headquarters, Magen Israel. You also helped establish the National Emergency Situation Room for Arab Society before, and previously were, and among many other roles, advancing economic development in Arab society. You're famously known for founding the Authority for Economic Development for Arab society. I want to start with how challenging the role that you are in now. I mean, you're no stranger to moving mountains in government, but recent news articles have highlighted the sheer difficulty of the position that you're in right now, both working to try to build trust with Arab society, as well as moving national policy in a direction that you think is right. And recent articles have talked about you're threatening to resign and your sheer exhaustion. I'm going to ask you, you're very, very professional, and ask you to speak also personally. Tell us what is different in this situation and what this role has been like for you.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. So I want to share with you, like our activities in the last month, dealing with this issue of Corona, COVID-19. I mean, I was appointed, like in August 15 with Professor Gamzo to establish, the desk, like for to deal with the coronavirus for the Arab society. And there is another coordinator for the Haredi society, and there's another coordinator for the general society. And the three of us are not from the health sector. So as I mentioned before, it is not conditional, like to be from the health sector, to run this emergency situation. I see my position is to coordinate and to work from one hand, with the government and with the government institutions, and from the other hand, with the Arab society. And I think I have done that, in the last decade very well. So that's why they asked me, to come to this mission and to help to manage, this crisis. I mean, we are, as mentioned before, I mean, the situation today of the Arab society is not good. I mean, we are almost about 40% of the daily new reported infected people. We are, the positive tests are about 6% in the Arab society compared to 2% in the general community. But we are doing a lot of tests, in the Arab community. I mean, today we are doing about 44 tests for every 10,000 citizens, which is almost similar, to the general community. The Haredi community are not doing, like enough tests. But, a lot of Arab localities are today, and the traffic lights are red, and we have about 7 Arab municipalities that are under lockdown. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, for this situation, and I think immediately after the first national lockdown, we were in a very good shape in terms of percentage of those infected people. But then, as I mentioned, I mean, the weddings, came back. People are traveling to Turkey and to the West Bank, and are less responsive, to the Minister of Health directives. And I mentioned before, we are doing a lot of tests. And on the local level, I mean, what we are doing, we are working, to closely with the local authorities. We are increasing, the tests in each one of the local authorities. We are doing a lot of epidemiological investigations. We are also like funding the local authorities, to deal with this crisis. And on the national level, we are trying to address, these issues of weddings, of, trips to Turkey and all these things. On the personal level, Liron, as for your question, it is not an easy position. On the one hand, I can representing here like the Ministry of Health, and on the other hand, I'm part of the Arab society, and I have like a disagreement, as example, like today with the projector in the issue of lockdown, the Arab villages, because I think it is, not the right, like instrument to deal, with the disease in our community. And I think, the criteria that were approved by the government, they are too tight, and it is very easy. You have to understand that, to change, from the green or yellow, to the red color. And I want to give you an example, like Kfar Qasim, as you know, was all the time, it was, a long time, it was red, but after that it was for many weeks, like green. And it is, it is enough that, one family have done a wedding, like in Kfar Qasim, and more than 60 people were infected, in this wedding. And Kfar Qasim changed to be, red within like 2 or 3 days. So it is very, very simple, to change the color from green to red. And it is enough, if you will have, like some of these cases. And that is the problem that we are facing, in our community, in our villages and towns. The majority of the society is responsible society, and we approved, that we are responsible, like when we have, the national closure. But today there are a lot of, like individuals that are breaking the rules and, changing the situation, in their villages and towns. I have to say that, in the first wave, we have a great cooperation, with the Arab Mayors Committee, and we established the emergency room, and some of you supported us, like in this task. And now in this wave, the Arab Mayors headquarters, they didn't, like react, rebuild, this emergency room. And there is, almost no cooperation, between, the government and the local authorities. And I think I'm lacking this, I think this is a very, very important infrastructure that succeeded in the first wave, and it didn't succeed. It is not there, like in the second wave. And as you know, in the first wave, I was, I worked with the mayor's headquarters as a consulate, and I worked also for the government, for the Ministry of Interior, and we succeeded to cooperate. And I think this cooperation is not there yet, Liron. Yeah, I'm not hearing you.
Can you speak a little bit about the comparison with Jewish localities and what makes this interface between local communities and the national government so thin, so shallow? It was literally you were between the national emergency, the National Arab Emergency Room set up by the Council of Mayors in the first wave, and the national government. And now without this this Arab Emergency Room in full action, why is there, can you explain this gap of cooperation? Because we also heard that there was good cooperation between national agencies in the first wave, such as MADA and Picud Oref. Is that something that was built on? Is that something that is not able to be, to set building blocks for the future? Is that really absent right now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the situation today is a bit different. I mean, the crisis is being managed, you know, by the state authorities via the Ministry of Health. And I'm working like for the Ministry of Health. Unfortunately, the Arab Mayors, you know, Forum didn't, you know, like reestablish the headquarters. And today, you know, we are working separately, you know, with each one of the municipalities and the authorities. I mean, there is no national, you know, like figure, you know, that represent, you know, the Arab needs. So we have to work, you know, separately, you know, with each one of the municipalities. So it make, you know, like our job, you know, even, you know, more, you know, harder. You know, I have to work today, you know, like with 82 Arab and Druze and Bedouin municipalities. Me and my staff, you know, are in contact, you know, with all these municipalities. And it was easier, you know, like in the first wave, because, you know, you have this emergency room like in Shfar'am. And I have to say that also the NGOs, the Arab NGOs, they have, you know, have a great role, you know, like played a very significant role, you know, like in dealing with this situation. And I'm lacking them now. They are not there yet. So you have, you know, to build this national body at the Minister of Health. And me and my staff, you know, we are working, you know, closely with these different municipalities. And, you know, the problem, you know, is much bigger now.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so I'm going to move on, but I would want to just say, if there's some takeaway, maybe from a public health perspective on the cooperation that can be learned from this experience going forward, what do you hope to see would be developed moving forward, the way, in the sense that Corona has changed perhaps perceptions about public health or about cooperation between the national and local levels around emergency? If you had maybe a few words about what you hope will be an outcome of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, the Corona crisis, I mean, you know, like emphasized, you know, like several like issues. I mean, the gaps between the Arabs and the Jews. I mean, the weakness of the Arab localities. You know, the health system in the Arab community, which is very, very weak, and we have, you know, like to invest in the health system in the Arab society. We have to strengthen the local authorities, and of course, you know, the government has to, you know, to know how to work in a better way, you know, like with Arab communities. I have to say, you know, that you know, that the local authorities, they are playing a significant role, you know, in this crisis, and we are, you know, relatively based on their activities on the local level. So we have to support them, to give them, you know, the budgets, you know, to deal with this crisis on a local level. I mean, you know, like in the educational level, as example, I mean, because of the Corona now, like a lot of, you know, like students are, you know, studying, you know, like at home, and so they're staying at home. So the infrastructure in the Arab communities are very, very weak. You know, the communication infrastructure, as example. So I think that there is a lot of, you know, like things that we have to do in the long term, together with the government, and of course, you know, with the Arab headquarters.
Thank you so very much. I am going to move on for the sake of time. I know this is a whole conversation in itself, but thank you for all your hard work, and I hope that we see a light at the end of this tunnel for everyone. Thank you for your time. Afif Abumouh, if you can please unmute yourself and say hello, so you can come up on our screen.
Do you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Yes. Hi. Thank you.
Hi. Nice to meet you and to join to the meeting.
Thank you very
How
much.
are you?
So now we're going to switch gears. You're a computer engineer by day and a political commentator and social activist in your free time.
Yes.
I don't know if you heard Oliver Ranzinger's keynote. He spoke a lot about the current tensions in on the political leadership level. And I want to go to the, we didn't speak about the normalization agreements in depth in the keynote, but I want to go there because this raised a lot of interest in the American Jewish community, and I want to spend a little bit of time digging into the discourse with you. Arab MKs in Israel voted against the normalization agreements on principle. And we saw in the keynote that the diversity of discourse on the street is vast. And I'm wondering if you can share what you've been seeing. You wrote about this issue. You are in touch with Arab discourse. What can you say what can you add about what the discourse is about the changing geopolitical relationships in the region with Israel?
Regarding the agreements with the Emiratis and Bahrain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So first of all, good evening or good morning for all of you. Good afternoon. I don't know what's the time for all of you. So as I have said in one of my articles, the Arab people, the Israeli Arab people here are split over the agreements. So part of them, as Iran has said, don't agree with the agreements because they don't include the Palestinian side. But I think most of the Arab people here are happy with the agreements because the agreements grant them an opportunity to be part of the Arab world, something that they couldn't do it in the past because, as a result of their citizenship and the passport that they have, the Israeli passport. So a lot of Arabs find a good opportunity in these agreements. We have a good example, for example, the soccer player, Ria Sabeh from Majd al-Krum, who signed in, I think, Nasser team, Dubai, Nasser or Nasser Dubai, I don't know how it's called. And he is the first Israeli soccer player who plays in the Emirati League, let's call it. And this is was done as a result of the agreement. Secondly, we can see in the last months that a lot of Arab have traveled to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and they started enjoying the fruits of the agreement. It doesn't matter for what, for tourism or for business, but they really do it. And at the same time, as you have said, the joint list has voted against the agreement. So sometimes the joint list does not vote such as what the Arab people want. That's it.
You say this. What do you think this interest in traveling to Dubai says about Arab citizens, and what is the new generation looking for in their
It doesn't. It's not specifically Dubai or Abu Dhabi. I'm talking about the Arab world. The Arab people here, the Arab citizens, are disconnected from the Arab world because of the citizenship and the passport, as I have said. So these agreements grant them the opportunity that they so wanted all the time. I can give you another example. For example, the Arab Idol, how it's called. We had 2 or 3 singers from Israel, from Arab Israel, who has participated in Arab Idol. It's such as the American Idol, but it takes place in the Arab world. So, in the past, they did it with a Palestinian passport that they got it from the Palestinian Authority, I think. And these agreements can you grant you the opportunity to make some parties in Dubai, in Bahrain, and etc., and be part of the Arab world as a singer. This is something that was not done in the past. And we can say that you can do more money by these agreements. Yeah. High tech also. For example, I am a computer engineer, so you can do relocation to Dubai, not just to Europe or to USA. And there are a lot of fields that you can make money in them as a result of these agreements.
You think the private sector, do you think this will change some of the attitudes of the Israeli private sector towards the Arab-speaking public? What do you think that the role of Arabic in the cultural is an asset?
What to change the Israeli attitude about? I didn't hear the last part of your question. About the Israeli Arabs, you mean? The attitude regarding the Israeli Arabs? No, I don't think so. Because Israeli people, Jewish Israeli people, prefer Arabs who does not have availability to vote here to the Knesset. So two different things.
You feel like the political.
In addition, the Emiratis have a lot of money, so it's a big advantage to like them also. But most of the Jewish Israeli here, especially in the right wing, prefer the Arab without voting to the Knesset. That's what happened, by the way, in Jerusalem East, that they don't have the option to vote to the Knesset.
Right, which is the status of most East Jerusalem Palestinians is residency and not citizenship. We are so short on time that I want to invite I want to invite questions from. I apologize, Afif. I know we ran very long. I want to invite questions from the room. From Dina Charnan, what does the Palestinian-Israeli reaction say about their views towards the Palestinian National Project? So questions about, yes, what are the changes?
Okay, I think that Iran Zinger has talked about it. He has said that Palestine can wait. And today, if we look about the priorities of Israeli Arab people here, so number one is the violence crisis in the Arab cities and villages. And the second place is the housing crisis or housing shortage. The third one is education. I think Palestine is in the 5th or 6th place. There was done last year, a poll was done by Abraham Fund, and I think that Palestine issue was in the 5th place. I don't remember exactly, but it was in the 5th or the 6th place.
You're saying pragmatic priorities are really top center. Yeah.
This is why, by the way, this is also can explain why you have seen that the Arab people did not reject the agreement with the Emiratis.
Right. A lot of changing dynamics. we are so short on time. I really encourage everyone to read your articles in Al Monitor, your columns. We share a weekly media update.
Thank you.
That gathers them
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
You've been working very hard to bring many voices and to show a very a 360 framing of you give the context in which a lot of these dynamics are happening on an ongoing basis. So we really encourage everyone to look up Afif on Al Monitor. He writes.
Sorry, that's what I'm trying to say all the time. Please stop looking about the Arab society as one piece. We have a diversity and different voices in the Arab society. Not all of them are represented by the joint list. So please stop looking about us, how to say it,
in a general,
from the joint list point of view. So, and this, I think this is the big mistake which the Jewish people here do, that they look all the time about the joint list. So, for example, the agreements, if the joint list has voted against the agreement, so it means that all the Arabs are against the agreement, but actually it does not.
The joint party is the legal party for the Palestinians in Israel. Most of the Palestinians of Israel voted to the joint party. They have 15 members.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you talking about?
It doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter. I'm not attacking the joint list. I'm saying that there are different voices, and there are various voices in the Arab society. The joint list today, the project of the joint list, I can say that sometimes I feel that it's more economic project than a politics project. I can say also that a lot of parts in the joint list want to make us, or to make the Arab society to become such as the ultra-Orthodox society. That Arab,
by that you mean
Arab who vote to Arab, such as what happens with the Shas and the Yahdut Torah and etc.
We should maybe schedule another call on these dynamics, because I think that the issue of political representation and the options that Arab citizens have in Israel does, especially with a threshold having been raised in 2015, really put the joint list as a groundbreaking position in terms of creating opportunity for representation and pushing political discourse to the front. I saw you shaking your head. I know you have other thoughts, but we're at 1:43 and we promised people a prompt close. Nihaya, thank you for chiming in and showing really the diversity of voices and how complex this discourse is. I want to really thank the speakers, really thank the participants who were here for the whole thing, and I want to plug tomorrow's event, because if today we talked about the complexity and the diversity of all the dynamics happening in Israel right now, tomorrow we're going to look at Arab employment from a very different perspective. Arab employment, there's broad agreement that integration into the job market is key for Israel's economy, and that the barriers are things that need to be worked on. Corona has intensified these barriers, and we have leading economists, private sector representatives, Co-Impact, coming to speak about this. Thank you everyone for coming. I want to ask Daryl Friedman to say a few words. He's a co-chair along with Brian Lurie, and really hope to see everybody tomorrow. Thank you to all the speakers for sharing your insights. Daryl.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laron, and thank you for your good work. Without your professionalism and the leadership you give, this would not be possible. So thank you on behalf of all of us. The JDC is proud to be a founding member of the task force and to chair its executive committee. As we heard today, the issues are of deep consequence to Israeli society. The JDC, in our commitment to strengthen the most vulnerable, works extensively with Arab populations in Israel. It is vital that American Jewish leadership has a trusted resource such as the task force to learn about why these issues are important to Israel as a whole. We have a new CEO. Her name is Ariel Zhang, and she looks forward to joining the task force when she assumes her position in June. So thank you very much. And this task force is a very important part of the JDC program. Thank you.
Everybody, and we hope to see everyone tomorrow. Thank you for your time. Have a good afternoon.